Welcome to our fun little study group for PP 5361 Theory and Management of Public Service Organizations. This is a bonus section based on all of the generations, what years they represent, and all about the characteristics.
Wow, what a lively debate we had in class today on this. Gen Z were getting such a roasting too.
Oh, they really were. It was quite intense to watch.
It was. I mean, pull up a chair, grab your notes, and frankly, you might want to grab a strong coffee for this one because
Yeah.
this is the deep dive you didn't know you needed until right now.
It is good to be here. We do have quite a bit of ground to cover today.
We really do. And look, I have to address that elephant in the room immediately, like we just said. The energy in that classroom today was just through the roof.
It was chaotic.
Totally chaotic. But let's be honest, Gen Z was getting absolutely roasted in there.
There were a lot of very strong opinions flying around. People were arguing about work ethic, about screen time, about resilience. It felt like a piling on. You had people shouting about snowflakes and participation trophies, and then the younger students were firing back about economic ruin and climate change.
Right. It escalated very quickly.
It really did. And that is exactly why we are doing this deep dive today.
Yeah.
We need to step back from the anecdotes and the whole, kids these days complaining and actually look at the data.
Exactly. We need to look at the sources.
Because if we're going to be effective managers in public service, which is the whole point of PP 5361,
Yeah.
we can't rely on stereotypes.
No, you absolutely cannot.
I have to understand who we are serving and who we are working with.
Precisely. If you are managing a public sector team right now, or if you are designing a policy for a diverse population, you are dealing with what is essentially an alphabet soup of generations.
The alphabet soup. I love that term.
It's very accurate. I mean, you have people born in the 1920s still interacting with the healthcare system, working alongside or being served alongside people born in the 2000s.
Right.
And now we are even talking about generations that haven't even been fully born yet.
It gets so confusing, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I feel like half the time people use millennial to just mean young person.
Oh, constantly.
Even though some millennials are in their 40s now and, worrying about lower back pain and mortgages.
That is a very common mistake. And that confusion is part of the problem we want to solve today for you guys. We have a stack of research here from McCrindle, from Kasasa, insights from Parents Magazine, and demographic data from Boston University that really breaks this down year by year.
So our mission for this session is to basically move beyond the memes.
Yes, beyond the memes and into the management reality.
I like that. We want to map out the birth years, the shaping events, and this is crucial for you as managers, the financial and behavioral habits of everyone, from the builders right down to Generation Beta.
Okay, let's unpack this, because before we get into the specific cohorts, we really need to define our terms.
We do, because we throw this word generation around constantly.
Ex-
What actually is a generation? Is it just a vibe? Is it a marketing term? Or is it a math problem?
Well, it used to be a biological math problem.
Biologically.
Yes. Historically, if you look at early sociology, a generation was defined by the span of time it took for a person to be born, grow up, and have children of their own.
Oh, I see.
So for a long time, that was roughly 20 to 25, maybe 30 years.
Right, the biological clock.
Yeah.
The time it takes to literally replicate the population.
Exactly. But there's a massive snag with that definition in the modern world.
What is it?
According to the McCrindle data, the median age of giving birth in developed nations has pushed out significantly. It's roughly 30 years or even older now in many demographics.
Okay, wow.
So if we step to the strict biological definition, generations would be getting longer and longer.
Which doesn't make sense because
Culturally,
culturally,
things are moving faster than ever.
right, technology, social norms, global events, they're all moving at warp speed. So the biological definition feels way too slow for the pace of change we are actually living through.
Correct. So sociologists have shifted the goalposts. We now rely heavily on a sociological definition.
Okay, and what does that look like?
As McCrindle explains, this groups people into a span of roughly 15 to 20 years.
15 to 20 years, that feels much more manageable. It creates distinct buckets that we can actually analyze.
It allows for an organized way to compare groups, but it is not just about the calendar years. Dr. Deborah Carr from Boston University points out something vital,
What's that?
that a generation is a group of people who experience critical life events and transitions at particular historical moments.
Oh, that makes total sense.
Yeah.
It is about the shared trauma or the shared triumph, right? It's about where you were when the world fundamentally changed.
Yes. And those moments define their entire lives.
Right.
These shared experiences influence everything, from the baby names they eventually choose to how they parent their own children, and crucially for us in PP 5361, how they interact with institutions.
Because if you came of age during a time when the government saved the world, you probably trust the government.
Yes.
But if you came of age when the government was plagued by scandal or economic failure, you don't.
You are highly skeptical. It sets the baseline for their entire worldview.
Okay, so we have our sociological framework, 15 to 20-year blocks based on shared historical events.
Right.
Let's start at the foundation. We are going back to the beginning of the 20th century. Who are the oldest cohorts we need to know about as public managers?
We start with the group born approximately between 1901 and 1927.
Okay.
Depending on who you ask, they are called the GI generation, the greatest generation, or, as McCrindle refers to them, the builders.
The builders. I really like that. It feels substantial. It feels like concrete and steel.
It is remarkably accurate for them. They are literally the generation that built the suburbs, the institutions, and the physical infrastructure that we are still using today.
Wow.
But think about their shaping events for a second. They lived through the Great Depression, and then many of them went straight off to fight in World War II.
Talk about a heavy start to life.
Absolutely.
You have the total economic collapse where people were literally starving in the streets, followed immediately by a global conflict where the fate of democracy was at stake.
And that shaped a very specific set of values. Raising a family or growing up during the Depression meant that hard work and grit were not just, corporate catchphrases.
Right.
They were literal survival mechanisms. You didn't work hard to get a promotion. You worked hard so your family could eat that week.
So they put an absolute premium on stability.
Yes.
But here is where it gets really interesting, and I love this detail from the source material because it challenges the stereotype we have of them.
The music.
Yes. We tend to think of them as these stoic, serious figures in black and white photos, maybe scowling a bit in a suit. But the research points out that they popularized jazz and swing music.
Which is such a great reminder that every single generation has its rebellion.
Exactly. At the time, jazz and swing were considered wild provocation.
It was scandalous.
To the punk rock of the 1920s. They were out there dancing the Charleston and terrifying their Victorian parents.
They really were. But despite that wild youth, they matured into the ultimate upholders of civic value.
Because of the war.
Because of the war and the recovery. They became the joiners. They built the Rotary clubs, the Lions clubs, the local civic associations.
Oh, that makes sense.
They believed in the collective good because they had seen firsthand what happens when the collective completely falls apart.
That is a profound way to look at it. So
Yep.
that is the builders. Then following them, we have a group that I feel often gets totally overlooked in these discussions.
The silent generation.
Yeah.
They often are overlooked, which is ironic given the name.
Right. So these are the folks born roughly between 1928 and 1945.
Correct. So they were too young to fight in World War II, but they were born right into that era of extreme global instability.
They were the children of the war and the Depression.
Yes. But their defining shaping event, the thing that hit them during their young adulthood, was the McCarthy era.
The Red Scare.
Exactly. The fear of communism was sweeping the country.
And that really explains the name Silent, doesn't it?
It does. It was a time when it was genuinely dangerous to stand out or to speak up.
Because if you had a controversial opinion in the 1950s, or if you looked a little too radical, you could literally lose your job.
You could be blacklisted. Your life could be ruined.
That is a fascinating psychological backdrop for a whole demographic.
Yeah.
If you grow up learning that speaking out gets you in trouble, you are going to deeply value keeping your nose clean.
Keeping your head down.
Yeah, keeping your head down, working hard, and not making a fuss.
And that is exactly what the demographic data shows. They developed a very strong work ethic, but a quiet one.
Right.
They are rule followers. The expectation for their children was that you earn your way.
There were no participation trophies for the silent generation.
None. You did your job, you provided for your family, and you did not complain about it.
But McCrindle notes something really sweet about them, which I appreciated.
What's that?
Despite being silent and very traditional, they are generally very resilient and adaptable. They are actually known for being quite appreciative of younger generations, even if they don't fully understand the new world.
Well, think about what they have lived through. They have seen it all. They literally bridged the gap between the pre-war world and the modern digital era.
That is true.
They remember when a long-distance phone call was an expensive luxury event that you planned for, and now they are FaceTiming their great-grandkids on a glass screen.
That takes a massive amount of mental flexibility.
It really does.
Okay, so we have the builders and the silents laying the foundation for the 20th century. Now we get to the generation that takes up a lot of oxygen in the room.
Oh, yes.
The demographic heavyweight, the baby boom.
The generation literally everyone has an opinion about.
Always.
Yeah.
Let's look at the stats. Born between 1946 and 1964.
Right. So currently they are roughly between the ages of 61 and 79.
Okay.
And in the U.S. alone, there are approximately 73 million of them.
73 million. That is a massive cohort to manage or provide services for.
It is huge. And the name obviously comes from the literal boom in births right after World War II.
Right. Post-war optimism was high, the economy was finally growing, and people just started families at record rates.
The soldiers came home, and the fertility rate spiked to 3.5 babies per woman at the peak.
Wow. 3.5. That is really hard to imagine today.
It required a massive, unprecedented expansion of housing and schools just to accommodate them all.
So they reshaped the physical landscape of the country just by existing.
They had to. New suburbs, new schools, new hospitals had to be built almost overnight.
But let's address the vibe shift you mentioned earlier regarding the class debate today. Gen Z often refers to boomers as out-of-touch grandparents. You know, the whole okay boomer sentiment.
The idea that they're just these conservative older folks who don't get the modern struggle, who are just hoarding wealth and pulling up the ladder behind them.
But if we look at their history, the source material reminds us they were the ultimate rebels. They had a wild youth that the okay boomer crowd totally forgets about.
Absolutely they did. They protested the Vietnam War. They were the driving force behind the Summer of Love.
They saw the rise of second-wave feminism and the civil rights movement.
They were the social justice warriors of the 1960s and 70s.
Exactly. They were the ones burning draft cards and marching in the streets. They weren't always the establishment. They fought the establishment.
That is such an important context to remember. They completely redefined society.
And they actually redefined parenting too, didn't they?
Yeah.
This was a detail in the reading that really stood out to me.
They did. The source from Parents Magazine notes that boomers were the first generation to really consider the child's perspective in the home.
Right.
They introduced the concept of family meetings.
Family meetings.
Think about the contrast there. Before the boomers, under the silent generation or the builders, children were seen and not heard.
You did what you were told, period.
There was zero negotiation. But boomers invited the kids to the table to talk. They asked, how does that make you feel?
That is a huge shift. That is the beginning of the democratization of the family unit.
It completely changed family dynamics forever.
Now, from a managerial perspective, for PP 5361, we really need to talk about their economic power because they are holding the purse strings right now.
They certainly are. They are often referred to as the bank of mom and dad, and the CASA data is staggering here.
Let's hear it.
The average net worth of a baby boomer is roughly $1.68 million.
$1.68 million. That is a lot of money.
It is. No, we do have to be careful with averages.
Because of the ultra-wealthy skewing it.
Exactly. The median is lower, around $387,000, which shows there is significant wealth inequality within the generation.
Even still, $387K is a solid foundation.
Right. As a cohort, they hold immense wealth. They benefited greatly from the post-war housing boom and long-term stock market growth.
However, and this is where it gets interesting for public service managers, they have significant concerns. It's not all golf courses and cruises.
Not at all.
Like what? If you have $1 million or even 400 grand, what are you actively worried about?
Funding retirement.
Really?
Yes. They are living much longer than the builders did. Medical science has kept them going, but they are facing declining traditional pensions and the constant political uncertainty of Social Security.
So they have money, but they are terrified of outliving it.
Exactly. But here's a truly surprising stat from the research. Boomers are experiencing the highest growth in student loan debt.
Wait, hold on. Student loan debt. At 70 years old, are they going back to college in droves?
Mostly no. It sounds completely counterintuitive, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But they are taking it on to help their children.
Oh.
They are leveraging their excellent credit to get their kids and grandkids through school. They deeply believe in setting the next generation on the right educational course.
So that bank of mom and dad concept is quite literal. They are basically financing the higher education sector for the younger cohorts?
Exactly. They're taking out parent PLUS loans or co-signing massive private loans.
That is fascinating. Now, in terms of reaching them, say you are running a public information campaign. You need to know their media habits.
You do. And they are still the biggest consumers of traditional media.
TV, radio, newspapers.
Correct. So don't put all your entire marketing budget into TikTok if you are trying to reach boomers regarding a new municipal healthcare policy.
Right. You still need to be on the 6 o'clock local news.
You do. However, do not write them off digitally. This is crucial.
What?
91% of boomers have a Facebook account.
91%. That is way higher than I would have guessed.
It is huge. They use it heavily to stay connected with extended family and to reconnect with old friends.
So Facebook is actually a boomer stronghold now.
It absolutely is. It's their digital town square.
But what about when it comes to banking and serious transactions?
They still prefer the physical world for that. They highly value face-to-face interaction.
They want to walk into a branch.
They do. And they still use cash surprisingly often, especially for purchases under $5.
That specificity is great for managers. Cash for small buys, face-to-face for big complex problems, Facebook for photos of the grandkids.
Precisely. You have to meet them where they are.
All right, moving down the timeline. We land on the generation that famously gets forgotten in almost every cultural debate.
The middle child,
Generation X.
born between 1965 and 1980.
Though some sources extend that slightly, right, to 1979 or 1981.
Yes, the exact edges blur depending on the sociologist, but
Yeah.
generally 65 to 80. They are currently aged roughly 45 to 60.
And how many of them are there?
There are about 65 million of them in the U.S.
The latchkey generation.
Hmm.
I always found that nickname a bit evocative. It really paints a specific picture.
It perfectly reflects the reality of their childhood.
Why is that?
Because divorce rates were rising sharply in the 70s and 80s, and more mothers were entering the workforce than ever before in history.
Right.
So you had millions of kids coming home from school to an empty house.
Letting themselves in with a literal key on a string around their neck.
Exactly. And waiting for their parents to get home from work.
Streetlights are on. Time to go home. That was the universal rule for Gen X.
It was. They were highly independent. They were also the MTV generation.
Right, the birth of music television.
Their shaping events were the end of the Cold War, the terrifying peak of the AIDS epidemic, and the rapid rise of personal computing.
They are the ultimate bridge between the analog and digital worlds.
Yes. They remember typing school papers on typewriters, but they also enthusiastically adopted the first Macs and PCs.
Now, we talked about boomer parenting being about family meetings and feelings. How did Gen X respond when they became parents? Did they replicate that independent latchkey style?
Quite the opposite, actually. Often, as we see in demographic studies, generations overcorrect.
Ah.
Gen Xers, who were left alone for hours as latchkey kids, became the inventors of helicopter parenting.
Oh, wow. That makes so much psychological sense.
Ugh.
They were left completely unsupervised, so they decided their kids would never be unsupervised for a single second.
Exactly. Unlike their own parents who just let them roam free until dinner, Gen X is deeply, deeply involved in their children's daily lives.
Their education, their social development, their physical safety.
They are the ones hyper-organizing the playdates and obsessively monitoring the grades on the school portal. They want to be the constant protector they never had.
That is so interesting. Let's talk money for Gen X, because while boomers have the accumulated net worth, Gen X is currently the engine of the economy, right? They are in their prime earning years.
They are the absolute financial powerhouse right now. CASAS estimates that Gen X will spend over $15 trillion globally in 2025.
$15 trillion. That is a massive amount of purchasing power.
They are the highest spending generation right now, bar none.
But it comes with a catch, doesn't it?
It does, a very stressful catch. They are also under the most pressure of any cohort. They are often called the sandwich generation.
Because they're squeezed right in the middle, between kids and aging parents.
Yes. They are often financially and emotionally supporting their boomer parents, who, as we said, are living longer and racking up complex medical bills,
Right.
while simultaneously raising their millennial or Gen Z children who are struggling with high costs of living.
That creates a massive strain on them.
The average Gen Xer carries about $142,000 in debt.
Ouch. 142,000. That is a really heavy load to carry at age 50.
Most of that is mortgage debt, which is technically an asset, but they are balancing a lot of monthly outgoings.
They are trying to pay down that massive debt while frantically saving for a retirement that is rapidly approaching.
They are essentially running on a financial treadmill that just keeps getting faster every year.
And what about their behavior? How do we talk to them as public service managers?
Well, they are very digitally savvy. Remember, they adopted the personal computer in their youth. But they are also intensely brand loyal.
So they do their homework.
They research heavily online. If they are going to buy a service or use a new government program or vote for a bond issue, they will look it up first. They read the reviews.
Trust but verify.
Exactly. But like boomers, they often prefer to finalize the important transactions in person.
And here's a fun stat from the reading. Gen X spends the most time on Facebook of any generation.
Really? More than boomers?
Yes, roughly 7 hours a week.
7 hours? That is essentially a part-time job.
So while boomers have the accounts and check-in, Gen X is actually living on the platform.
It seems so. It's their primary news source, their main social circle, and their family scrapbook all rolled into one.
Okay, let's move to the generation that recently surpassed the boomers in sheer size. The millennials, also known as Gen Y.
Born between 1981 and 1996.
They are currently aged roughly 29 to 44.
And yes, at 74.2 million strong in the U.S., they are now officially the largest living generation.
This is the cohort that gets hit with the smashed avo trope. You know, the smashed avocado toast trope. The idea that they can't afford houses because they buy too much fancy toast and expensive coffee.
Oh, right. A stereotype that completely ignores the macroeconomic reality, of course.
Obviously. Inflation and stagnant wages might have a bit more to do with it than brunch habits.
Just a bit. But before we get into the heavy economic stuff, it is really important to note that researchers, like those at Kasasa, actually split millennials into two distinct groups.
They do. Gen Y1 and Gen Y.2.
Exactly.
Why the split? Why not just treat them as one big 74 million block?
Because the life stage difference between a 29-year-old and a 44-year-old is, frankly, massive.
That makes sense.
The older millennials, the Y.1s, are well into home ownership. They are raising families. Maybe they are already refinancing mortgages or worrying about school districts.
Right.
The younger millennials, the Y.2s, might still be establishing their careers, maybe just trying to buy their first home, or still dealing with renting in an expensive city.
You can't market to them exactly the same way.
No, it's a great point for segmentation. You can't just send out a mailer that says, hey, millennials, and expect it to land with everyone in that 15-year block.
A 44-year-old is worried about totally different things than a 29-year-old worried about paying off student loans.
Exactly. Now, regarding their shaping events, the big one, the truly defining one, is 9/11.
Right. It happened right in their formative years.
For many of them, it entirely defined their global outlook. It shattered the illusion of domestic safety.
And then, just as they were entering the workforce, they hit the Great Recession of 2008.
That is a brutal double whammy. Global terror, followed by global economic collapse.
And importantly, they are the first generation to know a childhood both with and without the internet.
They remember a time before the iPhone, but they adapted to it seamlessly in high school or college. They are the transition team for the digital age.
Now, let's talk about the Rose element again. Millennials are often accused in the media of being incredibly self-centered. The me generation.
The data actually suggests the exact opposite. Yes, the source from parents notes that they are incredibly community-oriented and highly environmentally conscious.
They're often the ones actively pushing for sustainability in organizations.
They care deeply about where their products come from, the ethics of the companies they buy from, and the environmental impact of their choices.
And they are now the parents. Perennials, as the article called them, which is a very clever name.
Perennials, yes. And they are completely rejecting the helicopter style of Gen X.
Moving toward what is called gentle parenting.
Yes. They encourage their children to be their authentic selves. They are leading the cultural movement on accepting gender nonconformity.
They are very focused on breaking toxic parenting cycles, prioritizing emotional intelligence over strict compliance.
So boomers had family meetings, Gen X had constant supervision, and millennials have authenticity and emotional intelligence.
That is a really fair summary of the evolution. Economically, though, they are in a fascinating position. We mentioned the massive boomer wealth earlier.
Well, that wealth has to go somewhere eventually.
The great wealth transfer.
Exactly. Millennials are set to inherit over $68 trillion from boomers and early Gen Xers by the year 2030.
68 trillion. That is a number so big it doesn't even sound real to me.
It will fundamentally change the entire global economy.
But right now, today, they are still struggling with high student debt and the massive cost of living.
Which has led to a very specific mindset, access over ownership.
Oh, explain that.
Think Uber instead of buying a car, streaming Spotify instead of buying CDs, renting a designer dress for a wedding instead of buying it.
They prefer the utility of thing without the burden of owning it.
Because ownership has been priced out of reach for so many of them for so long.
And how does this translate to their service expectations as citizens?
They have zero patience for inefficiency.
None.
None. They grew up with Amazon Prime and Google. If your public service website is clunky or if a form takes too long to load, they will not just be annoyed. They will actively lose trust in your institution.
They view banking and government services as transactional, not relational.
Exactly. So unlike the boomer who really wants a relationship with the friendly bank teller, the millennial just wants the app to work seamlessly on the first try.
They trust brands like Apple and Google more than they trust traditional banks or government agencies.
Precisely. They want a frictionless experience.
Okay, now we finally arrive at the center of today's class debate, the generation that got roasted.
Generation Z. The Zoomers. iGen.
Born roughly between 1997 and 2012, currently aged roughly 13 to 28.
So these are the true digital natives.
They never knew a world without high-speed connection.
Never. They were born right into the era of the smartphone and ubiquitous social media.
The internet wasn't a destination they went to like it was for millennials. It was the atmosphere they lived in from day one.
And the main criticism in class today was that they are lazy or soft. That really seemed to be the consensus from the older crowd in the room.
It was harsh. Let's look at the McCrindle data, because it directly contradicts that narrative.
How so?
Gen Z actually volunteers at a higher rate than the average population.
Wait, really? They volunteer more.
They do. They are significantly more likely to work for nonprofits. They are highly values-driven. They care deeply about actually making a difference in their communities.
So the idea that they are lazy is just a misinterpretation of their desire for meaningful work.
Exactly. They don't just want a paycheck, they want a purpose.
Yeah.
If they don't see the purpose, they disengage.
Furthermore, they deeply value lifelong learning.
Because they saw what happened to millennials during the recession.
Right. They saw their older siblings get expensive degrees and then get stuck working barista jobs for 5 years.
They know that the old job for life concept is totally dead.
So they are constantly upskilling. They are watching YouTube tutorials on coding, on finance. That isn't laziness. That is strategic adaptation to a gig economy.
And what about money? Because if they saw millennials struggle so publicly, they must be scared straight.
They are. Kasasa explicitly describes them as fiscally conservative.
Really? Fiscally conservative.
Yes, and this is really important for managers to understand. They are actively avoiding debt wherever possible.
They prefer debit cards over credit cards, right?
Yes, because they don't want to spend money they don't actually have in the bank.
That is a very Depression-era mindset coming back around. It's almost like the builders.
It is very similar. They are opening savings accounts at younger ages than any previous generation.
But they still believe in the great Australian dream, or the American dream, of homeownership.
They do, but their biggest, most existential fear is that they simply won't ever be able to afford it. They are pragmatic realists.
So they are hardworking, fiscally responsible, and community-minded. That sounds like a pretty great generation to me.
It does. They are also leading the charge on mental health awareness.
Oh, yes. The article mentioned viral videos of moms giving their kids mental health days from school.
This generation is being raised to prioritize their psychological well-being in a way literally no previous generation was allowed to.
That's a good thing, but I can definitely see how an older boss might interpret a request for mental health day as just skipping work.
And that is exactly where the intergenerational friction happens in the workplace. It's a clash of values and definitions.
For the boomer boss, resilience means showing up no matter what.
Even if you are burned out. But for Gen Z, resilience means taking care of yourself today so you can actually show up effectively tomorrow.
That is a very powerful distinction. Okay, let's look to the future. We have two more groups to cover quickly. The kids and the babies.
Generation Alpha.
Born between 2010 and 2024.
These are the children of millennials, mostly.
The iPad kids.
Yes, or Generation Glass, as they were sometimes called. 2010 was the year the iPad launched, and it's also the year Instagram launched.
So they have been swiping glass screens since they were literal toddlers.
They instinctively know that a screen is something you touch to manipulate the world.
And they are also the pandemic babies.
Right. Some were born during COVID. Others started their crucial early schooling on Zoom.
We don't fully know the long-term impact of that isolation yet, do we?
Not yet, but demographers predict they will be the most formally educated and wealthiest generation in human history.
Largely due to that huge wealth transfer we discussed, and the trend toward much smaller family sizes. More resources concentrated on fewer kids.
McCrindle also calls them honey badgers,
Honey badgers, I love that. Why?
implying they are fearless and naturally challenging of authority.
Because they have access to all the world's information in their pocket.
Exactly. They aren't going to just take your word for it because you're the teacher or the boss. They will literally fact-check you live in class.
That is terrifying and awesome. And finally, the generation that is just starting to arrive.
Generation Beta.
Born from 2025 to 2039. We are just at the starting line for them.
If Gen Z are digital natives, what are betas going to be?
They will be the AI native.
AI natives.
They won't just grow up with the internet. They will grow up with artificial intelligence as a constant, proactive companion.
That absolutely blows my mind.
Think about it. Smart homes that anticipate their physical needs before they even ask. Personalized AI tutors that adapt to their specific learning style in real time.
They will likely prioritize adaptability and extreme individuality above all else because their entire world will be custom tailored to them from birth.
And for banking. For public services.
Robo-advisors. Voice assistants handling all their complex finances seamlessly in the background. The concept of a physical bank branch might be completely alien to them in a functional sense.
So we have mapped the alphabet soup, from the builders to the betas. Now we need to apply this directly to our course, PP 5361.
Yes.
Why does a public service manager need to know all this stuff? Is this just fun trivia night material?
Absolutely not. It is critical operational knowledge because segmentation is everything in management.
You cannot market a public health initiative or a new transit system to a 20-year-old the same way you market to a 60-year-old.
Give me a concrete example from the data.
Look at technology adoption in banking. According to the research, only 38% of boomers prefer mobile banking apps.
Okay.
But for Gen Z and millennials, that number is around 75%.
So if you launch a new city service that is only an app, you are completely alienating the boomers who hold the most wealth and often vote the most.
Exactly. But if you launch a service that requires a paper form in triplicate, you are alienating the younger generations who represent your entire future workforce.
You have to run a multi-channel strategy.
Always. And look at AI usage. The surveys show that 61% of Gen Z uses AI primarily for education. They use it to learn new concepts.
Meanwhile, Gen X and millennials are using it primarily for work tasks, to speed up emails or write reports.
So if you are designing an educational outreach program for Gen Z, integrating AI is a must. But for boomers, an AI interface might just seem incredibly confusing or unnecessary.
Correct. But here's the curveball, and I call this the branch paradox.
The branch paradox. I like it. Tell me more.
Despite all these digital habits, despite Gen Z basically living on their phones, 69% of all consumers still want a physical branch within 15 minutes of their home.
Even the young ones.
Yes, even the digitally native generations.
Why?
Because when things go wrong, when there is fraud on their account, or a highly complex loan question or a personal crisis, they want peace of mind.
They want to know a human is available.
They want to look a real person in the eye and know it's being handled.
That is such a critical lesson for public service.
Yeah.
We can digitize, we can automate processes, but we cannot remove the human element entirely.
People still need to know there is a branch or a local office or a real person they can go to when the system fails.
Exactly. It's about fundamental trust. Technology builds efficiency, but humans build trust.
So let's wrap this up. We started with the class roast of Gen Z today.
I did.
Having looked at the data, the volunteering rates, the fiscal responsibility, the new definition of resilience, do you think the class was too harsh?
I really think so. But it is a cycle, isn't it? Every generation thinks they invented rebellion. I mean, remember the boomers and rock and roll?
Oh, yeah.
And every older generation always thinks the younger one is soft. The builders thought the boomers were spoiled and soft.
And now the boomers think Gen Z is soft.
It's just the circle of life, just with more smartphones involved this time around.
It is. But as managers, our specific job is to step out of that cycle and look at the objective utility of each group.
We need the grit of the silence, the optimism of the boomers, the skepticism of Gen X, the authenticity of the millennials, and the purpose drive of Gen Z.
Well said.
Here's a final provocative thought for you to chew on as you head into next week's reading.
Let's hear it.
We talked about the great wealth transfer. $68 trillion moving to millennials over the next decade.
A staggering amount of capital.
And we also talked about how millennials fundamentally value access over ownership.
Right. It is a paradox.
Exactly. So how will a generation that has spent its entire adult life renting, streaming, and sharing handle becoming the wealthiest generation in human history?
Will they suddenly become conservative hoarders of wealth like the generations before them?
Or will they use that massive influx of capital to fundamentally change how our economy and our institutions work?
That's a great question. And how will Generation Beta, raised entirely by AI, view human leadership in public service?
Will they even accept a flawed human manager, or will they trust the perfect algorithm more?
That is definitely a question for another deep dive.
It is. For now, thank you for joining our bonus study session. Do not forget to finish the reading for next week's lecture on public sector ethics.
It's a dry chapter, but it's important.
See you next time.
Class dismissed.